Hi, Mel. 2 weeks ago, in your video, Sleep Too Much, Sleep Too Little, you said something that has stuck with me and caused me to actually do a little bit of online research. You were talking about the strict Amish and how they bathe only once a week. And you mentioned, well, they have so many children, like 10 children, and so it would be hard to get them all in the tub every day. And this just planted a seed in my brain. I said to myself, yeah, probably the Amish must have many more children than the average American. So what happens to all those children since the Amish communities, are so small? Where do they go? This study demonstrates that Amish age standardized death rates are 19% below the U.S. death rate in 1960. Why 1960? I don't know. Natural fertility combined with low infant mortality, migrating to form new communities when population density increased, and selective but appropriate use of Western biomedicine have emerged as strong cultural patterns that facilitated reproductive success and longevity among the Amish. In other words, they have many more kids and they live longer. And this, of course, despite underusing the benefits of modern culture. Then I found a PDF, and by the way, I'll put the links up here. Found a PDF of a demographic study of the Amish that basically says doubling time. Rapid community expansion is driven by rapid population growth. Doubling time refers to the estimated number of years required for the population of a group or society to double. Using two different sets, blah, 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 blah. The estimated doubling time of this particular set of Amish communities is 22 years. The Amish population is increasing at a rate far exceeding the average for most countries of the world. For example, based on information, blah, 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 the doubling time for the U.S. is 140 years, or nearly 7 times the Amish estimate. For Canada, the doubling time is 233 years. Other highly urbanized and industrialized countries have even larger doubling times. Taiwan 140 years, Netherlands 175, Japan 700 years. Whereas countries of the world whose doubling time approximates the Amish include Egypt at 33 years, Mexico at 29 years, and Uganda at 23 years. So the Amish are beating even Uganda in doubling time, which I found fairly fascinating. And then the second half of the question that emerged to me was, what happens to these Amish? Do they stop being Amish? Well, apparently no, they don't. The what's called the retention rate, the rate at which people who are born Amish stay Amish, has actually increased in the 20th century. So basically what this means is that the Amish in the United States are growing at, 7 times the average for the country as a whole. So America is becoming rapidly more Amish, which was a surprise to me because I hadn't really thought too deeply about the Amish, and I just kind of saw them as these little self-sustaining but essentially unchanging communities. But in fact, what apparently happens is the Amish, when an Amish community grows too large to maintain the kind of the kind of personal community that is required to be, Amish, they essentially send out a colony. They create a new community, and some of these communities thrive and some don't. And so as the Amish in America are growing at 7 times the rate of the rest of the country, they are dealing with this by going out, buying new land where they can live an Amish type of a lifestyle. First is the amazement that there is land like that available for communities where you can actually carry on hands-on farming or various, basically labor-intensive industries with relatively small outputs. And I didn't read this paper carefully, and I'm sure there are many, many others that I could, but I'm too lazy, and I just want to make my goofy point. But basically, apparently, this is increasingly a problem for the Amish because land prices are so expensive, and if you think about the stereotypes of the Amish, you realize that looking for the kinds of places where the Amish would thrive, you would basically be looking at land that the American upper classes would also be coveting. In other words, property values you would expect to be fairly high for the kind of land that would support the Amish. At least in my stereotype. The Amish, to me, have always represented the most successful example of a truly of an ideal Christian community surviving by cutting itself off from the world and staying small, with a minimum amount of what you would consider to be the bad side of Christian or any kind of religious community. They're a wonderful example of people who are pacifists, good to the land, I guess, certainly better than we are, who don't turn apocalyptic, in every crisis, all this kind of stuff. They're great, but it seems really obvious that they are able to do this because they stay small. There's a dark side to the Amish. There was a movie about the Rumspringa, basically letting the kids go out and have bad experiences in the evil outside world, and all that. But also, there have been sex abuse scandals. Basically, they're too forgiving, or they have been accused of being too forgiving of sexual abusers, male sexual abusers. But in general, the consensus is that the Amish do a really good job of living by the standards that they espouse. So that's cool. And they're growing. They're growing. Now, they're such a small part of the population, measured in the 50s and hundreds of thousands, that they could grow at an insane rate, and it would be a long, long time before we ever actually saw any evidence. And my assumption is that there's going to come a point where the Amish are going to hit this wall where they're just not going to be able to find the resources and the free space and the affordable space to continue living their Amish lifestyle and growing as a population. So it's a very interesting thing to me because, well, for one reason, because just a short while ago I used the Amish as an example in one of my videos about gun control, where I mentioned the recent shooting at the Amish schoolhouse as an example of how the Amish were a model for people who resist the forces of commercialized fear. That basically, if such a thing were to happen in any other community in the U.S., the the people who make their living off the fear of something like this happening again would swoop in to help. No doubt there would be help involved. But basically, the metal detectors would go in. The community would get a SWAT team. I made jokes about the Amish SWAT team. They don't, and the message is they don't get one because they resist change. They resist progress. They resist consumerism. And the number one, I shouldn't have said that. Number one is wrong, but a big part of consumerism is the marketing of, let's not call it fear, let's just call it anxiety, that you buy more stuff when you're more anxious, and the essence of Amish lifestyle is to be at peace with, the nature of existence. This is an opinion piece from the October 2nd issue of the LA Times, which was the one-year anniversary of the Amish schoolhouse shooting. Today, many of us will pause to remember the 5 Amish girls who were murdered a year ago at a one-room schoolhouse in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania. Television crews will return to the community and dutifully record Amish children walking to their new one-room school, which looks a lot like the one torn down days after the attack. But the new building has a steel door that locks from the inside, and that makes all the difference. And the difference he's talking about is the difference to us, the non-Amish Americans. And this is a piece about what the Amish symbolize to us, the non-Amish. An innocence we lost a long time ago, a simpler time. This week, of course, we'll use the Amish to represent another quality of our lives that has been lost: security. We hear that term all the time now, especially in the context of the so-called war on terror. But the most unfathomable terror lies right next to us, in tortured souls like Charles Roberts, the shooter. And we never know when it will strike again. That's why the new Amish school in Nickel Mines has that steel door with multiple locks. It still doesn't have a telephone, but the school sits next to a row of non-Amish homes that do. During Robert's rampage, the teacher had to run to a nearby farm to dial 911. At the student's request, meanwhile, the driveway leading to the new school is paved. They are still haunted by the sound of Robert's pickup truck spinning over the gravel driveway on his way to kill their siblings and friends. Their schoolhouse has a different name, New Hope Amish School. And these gentle people do give us hope for the day when senseless violence no longer mars our schools and communities. But that day is a long way off, and we all know it. In today's national imagination, the Amish embody safety and security. So if the Amish aren't safe, nobody is. Those 5 children could have been your kids or mine. And we all know that too. So the Amish are enlisted in the constant advertising campaign for us being in grave danger of some horrific catastrophe. And if the article can be believed, the Amish themselves have adjusted to a new level of anxiety. There's no Amish SWAT team. They haven't allowed a phone, but they've recognized that something horrible has happened to them that hadn't happened before, and they've adjusted. So whatever is idyllic about their enclosed, insulated communities is a little bit less idyllic now. You know, a leak in the wall, you might say. It's interesting, this demographic article I found includes a hypothesis about why the Amish have developed a higher retention rate of membership in the 20th century than they had previously, rather than less. You would think, with all of the wonderful temptations of the outside world, more Amish would leave the strictness of their communities, but no, it's been the other way around. And there's talk here about the reasons why, quote, strict churches, unquote, are growing in membership. And basically, that's actually a subject for another vlog that I want to do and hope to do fairly soon, about what is going on in American Christianity, my feelings anyway. But for the purposes of this vlog, the other reason is more interesting. As the sweep of economic, technological, and social change transformed North American society in the 20th century, the social and economic cost of giving up the Amish lifestyle became more expensive. For example, in the previous century, switching from an Amish church to a different denomination required relatively less adjustment or cost. Most Americans were rural, and most rural people were farmers. Electricity, automobiles, and other technological accoutrements of the 20th century were not yet available. Everyone relied on horsepower. The distance, both socially and economically, was much less, and dropping out simply meant that one became a non-Amish farmer rather than an Amish farmer. As North American society urbanized and became more dependent on high technology requiring fossil fuels, Amish leaders recognized these technologies' impact on the erosion of community cohesion. They resisted many of these new technologies, preferring instead to maintain small-scale, highly cohesive communities, emphasizing face-to-face relationships amongst church members and their families. Today, the distance between the Amish and mainstream North American society is much greater, requiring a bigger adjustment for those who do not remain Amish. One implication of that argument is that modern Amish communities have a much higher percentage of discontented members than in the past, because someone who might have left the Amish in the 19th century or early 20th century now might be more inclined to stay, not because they're happy being Amish, but because the outside world is so alien and scary. And that can't be good for the Amish equilibrium that has worked, quite well for hundreds of years. So the external cellular membrane that protects the Amish communities from the outside world is constantly being poked and prodded and punctured, by outside influences. And on the inside, there's potentially increasing pressure with no outlet. And the very success of the Amish at reproducing relative to the outside world is going to put increasing pressure on them.